Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and author of the newly released book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. This morning we are meeting with Vince Antonucci, author of the newly released book, Restore, Break Out of Your Past and Into God's Future. Vince, welcome to the program.
And I'm so honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Vince pastors Verve, an innovative church that seeks to reach people who work on and live around the Las Vegas Strip. The upcoming television series, God for the Rest of Us, will chronicle Vince's work there. In addition to writing books, Vince leads mission trips around the world, speaks nationwide, performs stand-up comedy in Las Vegas, and most of all, loves spending time with his wife Jennifer and their 2 kids. Vince, you shared with me offline that your mother is Jewish.
That's right, yeah.
And so you come from a Jewish lineage. Now, were you raised in a Jewish home?
No, my mother, when she met my father, just kind of left all of that behind. She considers herself Jewish still, but I did not, was not raised Jewish. Didn't do any of the Jewish things, didn't have a bar mitzvah, nothing like that.
Understood. So you grew up in a Christ-centered home. Were you a Bible-believing family, or were you kind of agnostic?
My parents were, I think they're both atheists, but they never mentioned God, and so they're more apatheticist. We never talked about God. I never knew anything about God. Literally, if you had asked me when I was 20 years old to name one thing in the Bible other than that I'd heard that there's this Jesus guy in there, I don't even know if I'd heard that. And so grew up completely with no sense of religion at all.
What part of the country was this?
Mostly Northeast, Florida, and then New Jersey and New York.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what was it that inspired you? What was it that was the turning point for you that caused you to come to faith?
Yeah. On the Easter morning of my sophomore year in college, I was 20 years old. I was waiting for my girlfriend to go out to lunch. She was late, as usual. And so I turned on the TV in my dorm room, and we had only 3 channels. We didn't have cable TV. And I flipped through the 3 channels, and everyone was what I consider to be a dumb religious show. And I left one on for a second, not because I was interested, but because it looked potentially comical. It was an old man sitting in a red leather overstuffed chair, kind of like this, and he started to talk, and he said, "Today we're going to talk about," and he named something from Jesus' life that I did not recognize, and he said, "Most scholars believe it happened on the Tuesday of Jesus last week, but today I'm going to prove it happened on the Wednesday of Jesus last week." And I thought, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. I mean, I don't know if Jesus even lived, but if he did, it was a couple thousand years ago, and you're talking about Tuesday or Wednesday. But that sentence led me to realize that I did not know anything about this thing that so many people believed in, and ended up having me borrow a Bible and put me on a path where I ended up trying to disprove the Bible, and ran into, like, going to the library, ran into all this evidence for Jesus, and became a Christian really just because it's true. At that point, there was nothing emotional, there was nothing relational. It was just, if it's true that there's a God who sent his son and he died for me, then I'm in. And it was true. And so that was kind of the beginning for me.
How many years ago is this?
That was 27 years ago.
27 years ago.
Yeah.
And so during that time of accepting Jesus as your Messiah, how then did your life change, and what direction did you go in?
Yeah, it radically changed. And I didn't see it coming, honestly. Like I had no experience with Christians, with church. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to do this, and found myself in this relationship with God. I really struggled to believe that God loved me because I guess because I had a father who was very abusive, and emotionally and verbally, sometimes physically, never made me feel loved, never said the words "I love you." And so I struggled with that. I believe God loved everybody but me. Intellectually, I knew that didn't make sense, but that's just kind of what was in my heart. But my life started to change, and as I really was able to come to grips with the fact that God did love me, that just propelled me forward. That just all the all the junk that I had been carrying just started to come off, and it just changed my life in so many ways, including I just had this passion that, man, no one ever mentioned Jesus to me. It's not just that I didn't go to church. I never had anyone in school or anyone mention Jesus, invite me to church, tell me about God. And so I was like, I am going to tell the world. Apparently no one else is, or somebody would have mentioned it to me. So I'm going to tell the world. And that led me to transfer from law school to seminary and to start now two churches. I started one in Virginia Beach, Virginia. I was there for 12 years. And then 7 years ago, I started this church here in Las Vegas, just off the Vegas Strip.
So in this transition, you become kind of, you have a Pauline call on your life. You become you have this apostolic calling that, and I had a very similar experience. I thought that when I came to faith at age 44, 22 years ago now, that there was nobody telling the Jews about Jesus because nobody told me.
Right.
Jesus was the God of the Gentiles. They had their own God. We had the God of Israel. And I was raised in the synagogue. So I had a Jewish identity. You have this Antonucci, Italian father, Jewish mother, who I'm sure if you said to them, are you sure you're atheist? You swear to God? That's usually my line to an atheist is, so you're an atheist, you swear to God? You usually catch them right in there and have a lot of fun with it. So in planting a church in Virginia Beach, were you married at the time?
Yep, married. At that time, I had no kids. I now have two kids, but yep, I got married. Actually, a girl I led to faith in college, and then I went off to law school and then to seminary, and we started dating in those years when I was away, kind of long distance relationship. Got married, and we're married for about 3 years before we started the church in Virginia Beach.
And so now that you look back on it, you know that being in the ministry pays so much more than being in private practice law.
Right.
And that's the reason why we do this is
Yes.
because the fame and the fortune and the outpouring of funds is so great, so compelling that, that we do this.
Right.
So Virginia Beach, military surrounding, great Messianic congregation there. As a matter of fact, I think the world's largest rabbi is in Virginia Beach. It was a commander on a submarine, and he's 6 foot. I think he's 6'5", which is the tallest you can be to be a submariner. And everybody asked him the question, "How did you get into the submarine?" He said, "Same way as everybody else, 1 foot at one step at a time." But that congregation has done very well and reaches a great community. What was the reason for your change? Was there something that happened in the congregation, or were you being pulled and tugged to something new?
The change in my life? The biggest, after becoming a Christian, the biggest change that happened was that I finally forgave my father, which is, I know we're going to get into this book, Restore. It's one of the themes in this book, Restore. But so I became a Christian, hated my father, just tons of bitterness, and started reading these Bible verses that say we're supposed to forgive. And I was all in with God. I wanted to do whatever God asked me to do. And so I genuinely wanted to obey God and forgive my father. And I would say the words. I'd say, "Okay, I forgive him, God." And then the next day I would still hate him and still have bitterness and realize I didn't really forgive him. And that went on for years. So about 9 years of just this constant struggle of wanting to forgive and being ruled by bitterness, and it making me feel unlovable by God, making me treat other people in ways I didn't want to, but I just had this anger simmering inside of me that would pop out at the most inopportune times and for the wrong reasons and at the wrong people. And then finally, I was able to forgive my father, which involved me going to a recovery program That, which again led into this book, Restore, which talks about recovery principles for people who want to get on a path to freedom. But it was that program. It was a 26-week program that met on Monday nights for 3 hours every Monday night, and then there was homework and books to read. Oddly, it was a program for people with sex addictions and sex issues, and I don't have any of those. I've got lots of other issues, but I don't have any of those. But I had two friends who went through this program and came to me and said, separately said, you need to go to this program. And I said, I've got all kinds of issues. I just don't have the sex ones. Find me a different program and I'll go to it. And both of them said, yeah, but the main thing that they talk about in this is forgiving your parents. Most people with addictions, especially sexual addictions, typically the root of it is some sort of anger, bitterness towards a mom or dad. And so they teach you how to forgive. And so I was so desperate to obey God and to just be done with the bad feelings towards my father. I went to this group, which was very awkward. Like it was, probably about 60 or 70 people. And then we'd break into small groups of about 8 people. And everybody there was there for some sort of sexual thing. And I was there to forgive my dad. And so it was just a little weird, but it was very powerful. And the principles I learned and just putting that much energy into, I had spent so much time being hurt by my father and so much time resenting my father that I think just a quick, I forgive him, wasn't sufficient. I needed to put that much energy into praying through and asking for God's help and learning about forgiveness before I was able to finally truly forgive. And that just radically changed my life. I like to compare it to, I say, if you've ever held a beach ball underwater, like in a swimming pool, you can hold it underwater, but it wants to come out. There's this immense pressure, and eventually it's going to come out. And that was like my life up until I forgave my dad. It was like there was this pressure underneath it that I don't even know if I realized it was all about my dad, but it was there and it wanted to come out. And I was just this like inside an angry person. And when I forgave my dad, it was like it deflated the beach ball. Like my wife immediately started saying, there's something different. Like, what's going on with you? And she would tell you today, it's been now about 17 years, 18 years. She would say he's a completely different person in those 17, 18 years compared to the 10 prior.
I completely relate. I grew up with a Hungarian father. You grew up with an Italian father. There's an Eastern European way, which is different than the American way. And you look and you see these encouraging dads and these cheering on dads, and the only fists cheering on were aimed towards you, not cheering
Right.
for your son.
Yeah.
And I went through a very similar experience in having to really cleanse myself of all, and I mean all, bitterness, unforgiveness, sucking on the worst cough drop in the world, and that is God says to bless those that curse you and pray for those that despitefully use you. So I would put my head on my pillow at night and I would grit my teeth. And I would say, Lord, I will be obedient to you, but it is from a depth of complete and solid obedience. And through my grit teeth, I would say these words, Lord, you bless that sorry sucker if you can.
Yeah.
And that was where my prayer life began for the people who had betrayed me, for my father, for those people. And John Trent, great, if you've not ever read his book, Heart Shift, and some of his other work, said, you just keep doing this. And pretty soon, day after day, the teeth wouldn't grit so hard, and it wasn't really bless that sorry sucker if you can, to blessing those people. And then all of a sudden, this weight is lifted off of you, and you realize that saying that unforgiveness is like you drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And you say, well, that's the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. But it's absolutely what bitterness and unforgiveness is all about. And it's a simple concept, but it's very hard to remove it. And that's why God talks about that bitter root, because that root will wrap itself around your heart. And it's out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speak. I'll give you a lesson in your Jewish background. There's no Hebrew word for brain because you don't think with your brain. It says, as a man thinks in his heart, so he does. So when you start to think about that, it's really quite extraordinary. Now, you went through this 26-week program, recovery program, which is obviously more than the traditional 12-step. What was it that you had the most difficulty with in embracing, and we'll call it recovery?
Well, with my dad, with that situation, I think for me, a lot of it was just learning why God wanted me to forgive and what forgiveness was. And I did not understand that at the beginning when I was gritting my teeth and saying, okay, I forgive him. I really didn't understand what I was saying. And so, or what I was being asked to do. And so when first of all, exactly what you said, I finally understood God's not asking me to forgive for my dad's sake. He's asking me to forgive for mine, that I'm the one in the prison. And if I forgive him, I'm not releasing him, I'm releasing myself. And but the other thing was understanding what forgiveness is, because I think so many of us, we think that if I forgive, it's saying that what he did was okay. But that's not what forgiveness is. The Bible says what that person did was evil. And some people think, and I did, it's waiting. It's waiting for the bad feelings to go away, or it's waiting for him to finally apologize. But that's not what forgiveness is. We think, well, maybe forgiveness is just pretending it didn't happen, and just, okay, I'm just going to have a good relationship with him and pretend all that didn't happen. But that's not what forgiveness is. And so I finally understood that forgiveness is releasing my hopes for a better past. That we spend so much time thinking, well, he shouldn't have, and if he didn't, I would have. And it's like, yeah, that may be true, but what happened is what happened. And if I continually hope for a better past, I'm going to continue living the past, and it's going to ruin my future. I also realize that forgiveness is releasing my right to retaliate. God says, revenge is mine. Your job is to live at peace with everyone. And so it wasn't saying, he doesn't deserve punishment. It was saying, I'm not the one to punish him. If God feels like that's the right thing, he's good at making those decisions and I'm not. And then the last and most important thing was that forgiveness is releasing Jesus' power in my life. That I had tried so hard to forgive, but it finally came to me that I was trying in my own power. I was gritting my teeth, trying to well up all the willpower I had to say, okay, I'm done with it, I forgive him. And I was not capable of forgiving him. And I think that's the first principle of recovery, no matter whose version you look at. It's realizing I can't, but God can. That this is not going to be my willpower, it's going to be his power. And so finally, I just turned to God and said, God, I'm going to stop saying, I forgive him, and say, God, I can't forgive him, but you could forgive me. And so I know that I have your forgiveness to give to others. And so I can't do this in my power. I don't have the forgiveness to give, but I have your forgiveness to give. And it was when I really turned to God and made it about him that I was finally able to move past it. And like I said, change my life. And that is a chunk of this book, Restore, is talking about some of the lessons I learned and how people who struggle like we do with bitterness towards whoever did whatever, how they can get past that and finally move past their past and into the better future that God has waiting for them.
Vince, was your dad alive when you were able to forgive him?
No, unfortunately, he had died, which and not very long before that, which stinks. I really wish that I was able to tell him that I forgave him, and so that was a hard thing for me. Of like, man, I wish. And my dad was in and out of jail. He was a professional poker player slash con man slash degenerate gambler. He ended up on America's Most Wanted, so I've got that going for me. And so there was long stretches where he would disappear, and so I didn't even have an ability to mend things with him. but he had died. I didn't even know when he died. Like nobody found him for a long time. He was in a hotel room for a week or two before somebody found him. But yeah, I was unable to tell him to his face, which people ask me about. I was like, what if you can't tell? What if the person's not around anymore? And I encourage people that there's something powerful about making that forgiveness more concrete. And so I encourage people, pull up an empty chair and talk to it, with God. God sit next to me, and I'm gonna say these words, or write a letter and then burn it up. But something where it's not just thoughts in your brain, because I think too often we can wonder, well, did I really think that? And maybe I didn't. And so, like, say it out loud, put words to it, or write it down on paper, even if you can't say it to the actual person.
I want to share this with you so that because I just so understand where you are. I was asked to preach my father's funeral,
Oh, wow.
and I had only been a believer for a little bit less than 2 years. And one of the very first things God dealt with me about was bitterness and unforgiveness. Then my father passes, and I'm the last person he speaks to. Hospice is there. They put him on the phone with me. I hear his labored breathing. I know he's comatose. And I forgive him, and I release him. And I tell him that I'm releasing my hold on him. And he has my promise and commitment that I will look over the family, and it's okay for him to die. 10 minutes later, he passed.
Wow. Wow.
And then I got the call from my mother saying, listen, we don't agree with your Jesus belief, but you are the only one in this family. Every third generation of my family's a rabbi. You're the only one that's rabbi, whether we like it or not.
Right.
Will you preach your father's funeral? And I
Wow.
said, I'm so conflicted because I just, in death, I reconciled with him. And they said it was her position that you are the only person. First of all, there's no rabbi that ever knew him because he didn't go to synagogue. There wasn't anybody to stand up and speak for him. So they asked me to preach his funeral.
Wow.
And I had to confront that unforgiveness. I had to confront that, who I saw him as, and coined this phrase that you're never too old to have a happy childhood. And said, and I'll say to you before we go to break, I encourage people who have gone through what you and I have gone through to find one memory, and that be our story of our youth. I remember at 13, the first time my father took me into a locked workroom and showed me and allowed me to handle the handmade tools that his father had made. And people say to me, wow, what an honor. That must have been an amazing childhood to have that experience. And I go, yes, it was. I was able to separate all the filthy canvas, all the dirt, become the gold miner, and get rid of tons and tons of dirt, and reach in my pocket and find one nugget. Because you're never too old to have a happy childhood. And that really is the completion of the process of finding something to hold on to that was good. And reflect upon that, because of course we're instructed, Ephesians, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is good. These are the things we're to think upon. And so this is part of that process. We're talking with Vince Antonucci, author of Restore, a great book, not a 12-step, a process of working through unforgiveness and the bitter root that I would say that in honesty, the largest portion of the body of Christ struggles with, because 50% of all spousal abuse, 50% of all pornography addiction, 50% of all drug addiction, 50% of all divorce happens in a Christian home. And I would say, and I think you would agree, that it is unforgiveness and bitterness that is the consuming power, not the power, love, and forgiveness of God.
Right.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we're going to dig into some of the text and hear the story of why Vince wrote this book, who he wrote it to, and what the message is for you. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Hello and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Vince Antonucci, author of Restore, a new book about recovery, about restoration. I'm always reminded that in my Jewish mind, when people tell me, and I read in Scripture that Jesus came to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captives free, my Jewish mind always wants to ask the question, set me free of what? I want to know what I'm being set free from.
Yeah.
And it's, of course, from everything. It's from sin, but we're not really set free from sin, but what we're set free from is the inability to forgive. And it's huge. We, in the natural, are unable to forgive. We are not wired to forgive. And it's only through the power and the love of Jesus, of Yeshua, of God forgiving us, even in the traditional Jewish synagogue that I grew up in. Forgiveness, once a year, Day of Atonement, hoping your name will be inscribed in pencil, because it could be erased the next year in the Lamb's Book of Life. This is an ancient thought process. This is embedded for 5,000 years, that forgiveness comes through this process. Now, 3,000 years later, Jesus comes with this message to bind up the brokenhearted and set the captive free. Why are we brokenhearted? And what are we captive to? And the heartbreak is bitterness and unforgiveness.
Yeah.
The setting free is the setting free from the inability to forgive.
Yeah.
You wrote this book, and you say that what inspired you was a friend named Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the book is about setting you free from your past, and for some that would be hurts from our past that we need to forgive, but for others of us it's addictions. And as Christians, we don't like the word addictions. I don't know many Christians who would say, yeah, I guess I have an addiction. But I would say, if there's something that you do that you don't want to do and you can't stop doing, I'm going to call that an addiction. You don't have to call it. You can call it a bad habit. Or if there's something that you want to do that you can't seem to start doing, I'm going to call that kind of addiction. You can call that whatever you want. And so, the book is how to get past the hurts, and also those behaviors that it's like, I want to stop, whatever it is. And so Scott was a guy who, when I met him, was one of the most wise, centered on Jesus people I've ever met. Just he was in a small group, a men's group with me, and people would say something and he would have the most wise and biblical advice, and he would have a perspective that other people didn't have, and I was just like amazed by him. And so one day, or not one day, actually over and over, I said, Scott, where did you get that? Where did you get that wisdom? Where did you get that perspective? And his answer every time was rehab. And so I discovered over time that Scott had a gambling addiction where he owed literally over $1 million to Las Vegas casinos and a couple $100,000 to the Mexican mafia, who had come to his house to kill him. Like, he was a massive gambling addict, but had some people who loved him, some Christians, and sent him to rehab, and it worked. And I just started to think, man, Scott was freed from this massive addiction that had its claws in him, and I have things in my life that I can't see. I eat when I'm bored, or when I'm to overdo feelings, and I know people who buy things and keep shopping even though they don't want to, or people who are, I would say, addicted to their phones. They say, yeah, I waste so much time on social media and I don't want to. Or people who whatever it is. There's a million things. Who only feel important if they're successful or if they have a guy's attention. Just so many things that it's like, man, I know that that's not a healthy behavior or a healthy way to think, but I keep doing it. And so I got jealous of Scott. I was like, his addiction was socially unacceptable enough that people sent him to rehab. But me eating too much, or my friend who shops too much, or my friend who plays video games too much, no one's going to say, hey, we're sending you to rehab for that. But we need whatever he learned. I'm like, I need that too. And I think everyone I know would say, yeah, I've got something in my life that I wish was different. And so I got inspired to learn what are the recovery principles, biblical recovery principles that I've read, because I've read the Bible a ton of times, but I've never maybe put together, maybe never applied to my life in the right way to help me get free of the things that I can't seem to get free from.
Is this an ongoing battle? Paul writes, and here his wisdom, his commitment, his value system shifted from, he didn't stop being a Pharisee. He became a believing Pharisee
right.
in Jesus. He didn't stop being Jewish. He became a believing Jewish man. But he says, I do what I ought not to do.
Yeah.
And what I ought to do, I don't.
Yeah.
That kind of sums up the human believing condition, that we're in this pressure cooker, and it's like the top is sealed, and the heat's on and the pressure builds because the world pushes us. We've got bills to pay. We've got mortgages. We have retirement. Right. We're not all taken care of. We don't have inheritances. We don't have families with fortunes. We don't have great wealth. We have to get up every day, whether we feel like it or not, and go to work, or we don't get paid.
Right.
Don't all Christians really struggle with this? And is it a masquerade? Is it a facade? Is it just a lack of reality check? What's going on?
Sure.
That compelled you to write this?
I would say for me, and I think this can be true for anyone, that the pattern of my life before was that I was tempted in certain ways, and I'll give an example, and fell to those temptations. And the pattern of my life today is I'm still tempted in the same way, but the pattern is I don't fall that temptation. And I'm not saying I never do, but it's different. So I'll give an example. One of the things I struggled with was, because of my father, it wasn't just bitterness towards him, but it was a self-image that I thought of myself as flawed, as meaningless, unlovable, as a failure. Anything I do isn't going to work out. And I just had this very negative self-talk that was the opposite of almost everything God says about me in the Bible. And I viewed God that way. I viewed God as at least towards me. And it's funny, because if you listen to my preaching at my church, you'd be like, man, you preach about God's love and grace a lot. And if I was being honest, I'd say, yeah, I totally believe it for everyone but me. But for me, I felt like God was this demanding father who I could never be good enough for, and who was always pointing out my faults. And that's because that was who my father was, and I was viewing God through the lens of my father. And I viewed me as someone who was unlovable, unable to do anything good, never going to make anything of himself. And so that was the pattern of my life, was being tempted to view God that way and to view myself that way. And I was tempted, and that's exactly what I did. I fell to those temptations. And then I went to another recovery program. So I've gone to a couple, which all kind of came together to make me go, I need to write a book on what I've learned. And so this was a 7-day program with a counselor, where you would get counseling for like 6 hours a day, every day. And then you'd go back to your room and work on the assignments he gave you in those 6 hours. So it was all day you were working on yourself. And I went to him and said, I want to stop viewing God the wrong way, and I want to stop hating myself. And so we worked on it, and it changed me. So one of the things I learned was, and it's in the book, is I had heard those lies from my father, from Satan, the whisper in my ear so many times. So many times I had thought of God as this high standard, upset with me God. And so many times I had thought of myself as an unlovable failure that I wasn't going to overcome it by just deciding to. And so this counselor, Christian counselor, had me write a letter. He said, I want you to write a letter to yourself from God about how God feels about you. And I went, that sounds silly. I'm like, I don't know how God feels about me. He's like, sure you do. You know the Bible. I said, well, I can write Bible verses. He said, fine, write Bible verses. So I wrote a letter to myself from God about me, which sounds funny. And basically, I strung together a bunch of Bible verses. This letter probably has, I don't know, 60 or 70 Bible verses. And I kind of paraphrased them a little bit to apply them to me. You know, Vince, you are, and then it was a Bible verse. And so the letter's in the book. But what this counselor encouraged me to do is to read the letter every day. Why? Because I had heard the lies 1,000 times. And he said, you're not going to stop believing those lies by deciding to. You're going to stop believing those lies by reprogramming your mind. The Bible talks about capturing every thought, taking every thought captive, making it obedient to Christ, and about this renewing of our minds that needs to happen in Romans 12. And he said the way that you're going to renew your mind is by hearing the truth 1,001 times, so that we can overcome the lies that you've believed for so long. And so I felt silly, honestly. I wrote this letter and I read it and I read it over and over and over. And all it is, like I said, 70 or so Bible verses strung together. But it's all about God and who he really is, and about me and who I really am. And so now, am I still tempted to think bad thoughts about myself? Yes. I have a book that's releasing today, which I'm very excited about. But at the same time, I'm tempted to think, Vince, you know no one's going to read it. Vince, you know it's not going to help anybody. Vince, you know you're not capable of doing anything good in this world, because that's my human father's voice. But way better than I used to be, I'm able to say, no, that's not the truth. That's not the truth about God. That's not the truth about me. Those are lies. I identify those as lies because I've been exposed to the truth so much that I can recognize a lie now, and I can say no to a lie.
We've got Dr. Phil out there. We've got Oprah. We've got Ellen DeGeneres. We've got all these people that Tony Robbins. I mean, they're big names, big money, self-help.
Yeah.
And there's a part of the church that feeds right into that I call it the Christcapades. It's the dancing on the surface of the word, the spinning, the entertainment. It's exciting. It's powerful. I leave the church supercharged on Sunday, and on Monday I say, how was church? And they go, greatest message I ever heard. I say, what was it? I don't remember, but I'm telling you, it changed my life.
Right.
But they can quote Oz Hillman. They can quote the 2-Minute Manager. They can quote Tony Robbins. They can even quote Scientology, L. Ron Hubbard, without even knowing they're quoting L. Ron Hubbard.
Right.
How is self-help detrimental to the believer? And, there's someone wrote a book on self-deliverance, and I thought to myself, I'm not sure I understand the concept of self-deliverance. If I could become demon oppressed, if my armor had that big hole in it and I patch it, I'm sealing that in. If I had the power and I was walking right with the Lord, could I really embrace self-deliverance? It was an oxymoron to me. Still question it. But how is self-help really detrimental to this God-centric plan to healing?
Yeah, exactly. Love that question. And this book, that's what I would say is, it is not self-help. It's the opposite. It's a God, what you just said, a God-centric path to healing. See, the problem I would say is that self-help only goes skin deep. That self-help is behavior modification. And so it's saying, okay, I know I've gained too much weight, so I'm going to go on a diet. I yell at my kids all the time, and I don't want to be that kind of parent. So I'm going to, count to 10 before I respond to them. And it doesn't deal with our actual issues of what's driving our behavior. Self-help is skin deep. And when I rely on self-help, really, I end up in a war with me, because it's me that got me where I am today. And so there's some reason that I act the way I do. And when I decide, all right, I'm not going to act that way anymore, and we've all experienced that battle with ourselves. We make a New Year's resolution. I'm going to stop, eating this kind of food, or I'm going to start exercising. But now it's me versus me, and the me that I've been all these years has got me where I am today. And so if I rely on me, where I am is where I'm going to end up. I may move a little bit. I may be able to willpower my way to a change in my life for a month or two. But then, and we've all experienced it, I'm back where I am. I was doing the same thing I used to, and I find myself in the same place. And so I do not want to rely on me. Relying on me has got me where I am. And so this book is saying, how do we, and like you said, Christians do this. You would think, well, we're the ones who have found God. Well, yes, we have. And we believe in God. Yes, we do. And so we must be the ones who rely on God for life change. I don't think we do. I think that typically we approach change the same way everyone else does, behavior modification. Okay, I'm going to well up all my willpower and try to stop doing what I always do, or start finally exercising or reading my Bible more. And it's just self-help, and it doesn't work. And I end up in the same place. It's Paul saying, I have this battle within myself, and in Romans, and then finally he's like, I can't win it. I keep doing the thing I don't want to do. And finally he says, who can save me? Who can save me? And his answer is, thanks be to God for Christ Jesus, only Jesus. And so it's got to be God's power, not my power. And I think that this book offers a very God-centric path to healing. It's actually 30 chapters, and they're short chapters. But the idea is that most people go to rehab for 30 days. And it's like, we're not going to change a pattern of our life overnight. And so this book says, how about you read one chapter a day for 30 days and just deal with that today. Today we're going to focus on this, and then tomorrow we'll move on. But every day is a God-centered way of going about moving past my behaviors and sin that I don't want anymore, and the hurts in my life that I don't want to be bitter about anymore. How do I rely on God to move past that?
Doesn't all this begin with the confession that all of us are addicts to certain behaviors? We all have an addiction, and it's innate. It came in the garden.
Right.
Pride is an addiction.
Mm-hmm.
I constantly find myself asking people, would you rather be right or be happy? That's a choice. You may be absolutely right and completely wrong, because you just destroyed somebody by being right. All of us have things that we can benefit from being delivered from. Even things we don't recognize will surface in this book, because you take us through self-reflection, self-examination. We may not even be able to put a name on it to start out with, but toward the end of this book, you're going to be able to come up with a name and identify some of the things that you've struggled with. You suggest that we might consider, like we do sin, big addictions, lesser addictions, venial, mortal addictions, and venial addictions, kind of like the Catholic Church does sin.
Right.
We do that. We justify and we diminish, but the reality is we all have work to do, and this is a pathway to getting that work done.
Yeah. So one of the things I did for this book, and we actually started a recovery ministry at our church. And so I interviewed a bunch of rehab directors and just tried to ask them questions, why did some people succeed in rehab and some don't? Just a bunch of questions. One person said something I thought was interesting. She said, addicts, like thinking of, real addicts, the drug addicts and the, alcoholics. She said, addicts feel desperate, so they cry out for help. Normal people feel desperate, so they watch TV. And I thought, wow, that's a powerful line that I'm almost, in a sense, I think I'm almost jealous of people who have the more socially unacceptable addictions, because if you have that kind of addiction, you can deny it, but it's hard to deny it because it's such an obvious impact on your life. But if my addiction is, yeah, I spend more than I should, or I spend more time on Facebook than I should, or I yell at my kids when I don't want to, or I stay at work because that makes me feel successful, and I don't spend time with my kids because that doesn't. It's just really easy to think that's normal. Everybody struggles with things like that, and to just continue on with that addictive behavior for the rest of my life and never deal with it. And like she said, just watch TV. I know there's something wrong, but I'll just try to escape those feelings instead of dealing with them. And so one of the things I like about this book, Restore, is that it's saying, hey, this is not just for drug addicts and alcoholics and gambling addicts. This is for us. This is for me who, why is it that when I'm watching TV, I go get something to eat and I'm not hungry? Like, what is that leads me to that behavior? What is it that leads somebody to go from boyfriend to boyfriend to boyfriend, and none of them are the right guy I should be dating? Why is that? There's a pattern there. There's some reason. And so, like you said, I think people probably will open the book realizing I've got a problem or two, and probably in the course of reading the book will go, oh, I've got another thing or two that I just never identified as a problem, but it really is. I need to change that, and hopefully I think this book will offer a way to change it, a God-centered way to get past that.
You call God's love the most powerful healing force in the universe. Why is that?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons we do what we do is because we have this God hole in us. And even as a Christian, I can still have that God hole if I'm not living my life in relationship, if I'm not connected to God. And so maybe the reason that I turn to food, or I keep buying new dresses, not me, but or new shoes when I don't need them, is because really I want God. I'm seeking God. And if I could just let my life be overwhelmed with his love, maybe I wouldn't need that anymore. So I think that's part of it. But the other part, and this is a chunk of the book, is if you study it, and I'm fascinated by this, but researchers and behavioral scientists have discovered that the reason we do what we do is our self-identity. We think I make decisions based on what I enjoy, or I weigh my pros and cons and I come to a decision. But the reality is that we make our decisions based on who we think we are. We will live out our identity. And so if I don't have an accurate sense of self, if I don't view myself as somebody who is God's beloved child, then my distorted self-identity is going to play itself out in decisions I make, and behaviors I have, and in addictions that I live out. And so one of the reasons God's love, unconditional love, is the greatest healing force in the universe is when I can finally view myself as the one Jesus loves. Then my decisions and my behaviors start to sort themselves out and start to become what God wants and what really I want. But as long as I don't view myself as the one that Jesus loves, I'm going to have distorted behaviors that don't reflect the life I really want to live.
We've been talking to Vince Antonucci, author of the newly released book, Restore. This is recovery for believers. Recovery for those that don't have overt addictions, but have struggles in their heart, unreconciled issues that they either identify or don't identify. You either have an issue and you want to do something about it, get this book, Restore. if you even have the question, do I have an issue? Do I hear my family members saying something to me repeatedly? Do my friends or my coworkers say the same thing to me all the time, but I just let it go in one ear and out the other? I ignore it. Maybe I'm struggling with something that I'm not acknowledging. Restore is the book for you, because it will take you through the point of not condemnation, not even conviction, but understanding and a path for reconciliation. Vince Antonucci, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
God bless you, my friend.
You too.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.